Hello and welcome back. It has been a long time since I've done a build for a server, and everything you see here in front of you is specifically for an Unraid server, but not just any Unraid server, a remote backup Unraid server. And these are all the parts that we landed on and selected to make this happen. So without any further waiting, let's go ahead and jump right on in. Well, I guess first things first, we're going to start with the motherboard. So I'm going to clear a little workspace here because obviously I had to get everything on the table just to kind of show off of what we got going on here. So as I mentioned earlier, this whole project is supposed to be for a remote Unraid server. And we spent a lot of time picking out all of these parts. I mean, like, it was literally probably over 4 weeks of back and forth discussion, what the client wanted to do, and yada yada yada. And after that long time, we finally settled on everything in front of you. Now, the reason why we went with this ASRock board here was because it was the cheapest one available at the time. Now, this is a remote backup server, so we're not really looking for any particular features. There's obviously not going to be any overclocking. We just need a basic board. And this one pretty much fit the bill. It came in at like $64, I believe, so it was incredibly cheap, and it's got all the features that we need for upgradability. And what I mean by that is we have two M.2 slots, so if the client decides that he wants to have NVMe cache in the future, he can get there. He's got plenty of PCI lanes for any additional daughter cards that he may need if he ever wants to do a remote Plex server. And additionally, in an interesting choice, we actually went with a Core i3 processor. So originally we were looking at potentially doing just like dual core Celeron or even a quad core Celeron, but we ended up not going down that route. Now, some of the reasons why we chose not to go down that route were simply because the client wasn't sure what he was going to do with the server in the future and wanted a little bit of extra headroom just in case he decided to throw some more containers on there, or maybe have a Plex server, or just any reason in particular. Like, he just wanted a little bit of extra headroom, which is actually something I was petitioning for just in case, because personally, I don't like to go with not really slower CPUs. The CPUs would be fine, especially for just a backup server, at least for now anyway. But I didn't want to go that route because I personally didn't feel comfortable, because it's not something I would do. But that's why we ended up going with this Core i3. Now, this Core i3 is not a particularly good one. It is a 9100, it's not a K, a T, an F, just a 9100. It does have onboard graphics, which is important, so we'll be able to do troubleshooting if there's something goes wrong with the Unraid during boot, which is pretty important because there will not be any graphics cards or additional graphics cards at this time for this build. Oops, I almost forgot how to put an Intel CPU in because it's been such a long time since I've done it. And that pretty much wraps up everything about this board and that CPU. Now, I would imagine this is going to be a pretty controversial build for a lot of people out there, especially when you think about how much we paid. I don't actually know what the total cost was of this build. I didn't buy any of the parts. I just made recommendations, and he went out and purchased those and sent them to me to build and create the server on his behalf. So, but if I had to guess, we're probably looking in the neighborhood of about $1,200 for everything. And that's pretty expensive considering if you're just looking at building a basic backup server, like a remote server. Like you would normally don't need anything powerful. Like a Synology NAS is probably good enough. In a lot of cases, I mean, with drives, you're probably going to look at $800 depending on how much storage you need. In this particular one, he chose to go with Seagate Ironwolf NAS drives. These are 8 terabytes each, and he got 4 of those, which should be plenty of space, because I checked his server at his house, and it was only using about 12 terabytes of space, if I recall correctly, maybe 13 or close to 13. So I can't even remember how to put RAM on these things. So, that should be plenty for him, at least for now, and he has room to upgrade, which we'll talk about when we get to the case. Now for RAM, we went with Crucial 4 gig sticks. It's 8 gigs of sticks, or 8 gigs of sticks, 8 gigs of memory total, which is actually pretty overkill for what we need. Again, we don't need this much RAM. We could have got away with 4. But the reason we went with 8 was because it was $32 for 8 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. Now this isn't special RAM. If I remember correctly, it runs at 2400 hertz, which, you know, honestly, we're not going to do any sort of overclocking of the RAM. If I can enable Intel's technology that I can't remember the name of at the moment, their overclocking XMP profile, I will. But otherwise, I'm just going to leave it at stock speeds because, again, guys, this is simply just going to be a remote backup server, hopefully. And he's not going to need all that extra speed. Now, what's cool about this RAM is it has kind of a high cast latency of 17. But if you actually look at the speed, 2400 megahertz, that kind of negates that higher cast latency. But again, not a high performance server, so it doesn't matter. And I have no idea what I need to install on here next. This is so awkward. I feel like I haven't but I haven't put a Noctua cooler on a system in a long time. So it's pretty nice, like, come back and do this because the mounting mechanism they had in the past was terrible, and it seems like they've improved it a little bit since then. Now, we are going to use Noctua's included thermal paste because, honestly, this is a performance system, and we don't really care about all that stuff anyway. And we're just going to drop a little dot on here. Ooh, that is way too much. Do not look at that, please. Now, for the cooler, we did go with the Noctua NH-US12 or something like that. We really did this. Oh my gosh, I have to take the fan off. Gosh dang it. Well, I'm going to sort of get it stuck or tied down first. Anyway, so we went with this because it's more than enough cooling for the current CPU, and if he decides to upgrade in the future, he will have that ability to do that. So again, this thing has a lot of flexibility, so if he ever does find that he needs more power in the future, he will have it. I probably installed it incorrectly, which made it a little bit more difficult than it should have been, but whatever, I got it on there. And for the record, I don't build PCs for just anybody. I tried talking my way out of this several times, but after much persistence, I was finally persuaded with what I can only describe as a large sum of money. So if you want me to build a PC for you, I'm just going to tell you I'm not going to do it. Because 1, you'll overpay. 2, it's probably not going to be a good PC anyway, and you could do better on your own. And 3, unless you got some seriously deep pockets, you don't want me to build the PC for you because it's a total waste of money. Alright, so now that we got this mounted, let's go ahead and get this CPU fan plugged in. What's really cool about this board, by the way, is if you did want to do water cooling for some reason, you have the option for you have a PWM port here for your cooler, the motor, whatever. I don't even know what it's called. The AIO. That's what you have. The pump. That's what I mean to say. Jeez, I'm all over the place. All right, so that's that. Now all I have to do is do a test boot and get Unraid installed on a USB 2.0 flash drive. And I think we will be pretty much good to go from here. So really not much else to see, but I don't know. Just kind of rambling. I'm on my feet here, but only barely. So now, the interesting choice with this build, one that I think many of you will really squint at or look at with extreme curiosity and judgmental eyes, and I almost cut my wrist open right there, is this power. Wow, I cannot knife this thing. Good Lord. And this is a baby knife. I should be able to handle the hell out of this. Anyway, so you guys are probably questioning, why did I get a 550 watt power supply? And I'll tell you, it is really hard to find a power supply that's gold rated, not that the system will even probably reach nearly close to 90% of the potential efficiency rating that would require to have this at optimal efficiency. I think I said that kind of weird in a weird way. But it is very hard to find a gold rated power supply that is fully modular. And that's how we landed on this EVGA. It was the cheapest, I believe it was the cheapest one that we both agreed on that was a quality brand, which was important to both of us, and it was gold rated and fully modular. So if you guys know of one in the future that was cheaper than this, I don't know how much you paid for this, but I know it was the cheapest one that we were looking at, which is why we landed on it. But if you guys know of other brands that make gold rated power supplies that are fully modular and cheaper than this $550 or $550 and use less wattage than this 550, because we don't need 550 watts for this build, like 250 is probably about right, maybe 400 if we wanted to add a grass card in the future, but even then I don't think he's going to go down that route or rabbit hole anyway. So it'd be cool to find one that is actually different than this, or cheaper, maybe not cheaper, but lower wattage, but also still gold rated and available for sale. That was another thing. You know how hard it is to find a power supply nowadays? It's ridiculous. All right, we are ready for our first boot. So I already have Unraid on my USB, and I don't know how to turn on this power supply. So we have lights. That's always a good sign. It means this board worked in working condition, or at least some form of working condition. And now we're ready to boot this thing on. I almost forgot how to turn on a computer with a screwdriver, because it's been a very long time since I shouldn't say it's been a very long time. It's been almost a year, almost. All right, so we are into the BIOS. It's picked up all 8 gigs of RAM, which is good. And it is showing that our CPU is newly installed. We're running at 3.6 gigahertz according to that screen, which is perfect. And we do have XMP. Let's see if we can enable that. It'd be pretty cool to have. Not that we need it. Oh, it is disabled. So we don't have XMP profiles already built. I don't know if that's a memory issue or if that's a motherboard issue. But the good news is we see the CPU fan. It's running at 384 RPMs right now. That is awesome. This thing is quiet. And of course, as you would expect, there is not really much from this BIOS, so it's honestly not worth really showing you anything. But what's cool is that you can control the fans with the fan curve, which is pretty nice to see. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to make sure this thing boots into USB. Man, I haven't seen an ASRock. Oh, there we go. Oh, I said ASRock. Wow, I've been saying ASRock this whole time. I meant Asus. Jeez. All right, so we enabled advanced mode, so that way I could actually feel like I know what I'm doing here. So this board actually has a lot of features. I take that back. Now that we hit advanced mode, there's tons of things to look at, some of which may be interesting to see, but we're not going to do it anyway. So we have our boot options set, and now we should be free to boot into Unraid. I wish this motherboard had onboard USB, which would be really cool. Well, it technically does have onboard USB, but I mean like onboard as inside the motherboard. So that way it could be kind of hidden away and we don't have to worry about it getting unplugged for any reason, because that is a thing. And I think we're good to go. Wow, that is one quiet reboot. Like, you can barely hear the fan spin up at all. All right, so what we're doing now is we're actually going to boot into, not into Unraid, but into MemTest 86 Plus. And the reason why is I want to run MemTest 86 to make sure that the memory is actually okay. Because one thing I'd hate to have happen is build this entire thing and then send it to this poor guy just for him to receive it, and then it starts crashing. And this is not going to be a server that's at his house. This server is actually going to be at his parents' house. And the reason why we've picked out all these Noctua fans is so we can get it as quiet as possible. And, you know, obviously Noctua is about as quiet as you can get and as efficient as you can get. So that was pretty important on the list. And again, you know, since it's going to be remote to him, being able to flush out any issues ahead of time is very important, especially for me, because I'm doing this work for him and he's like fronted all this money up front to make it happen. So I want to make sure I do as good of a job as I can. And the system seems to have frozen already. So that's not good. I'm hoping maybe I just have the RAM in the wrong slots. Anyway, so I'm going to get this going and we'll pick back up in about 12 ish hours. I don't even know what time it is. We'll pick up tomorrow morning or tomorrow night, whatever it may be, and we'll finish the rest of the build from here. Actually, now that I think about it, we can go ahead and work on the case and get the fans exchanged while we're waiting for MIM test to complete. So now, this case is really interesting. The primary reason why we chose this case is because it actually comes with this noise dampening foam. So this is supposed to absorb sound, but in reality, it's probably just, you know, reducing that clang noise that you would normally hear from most side panels. But yeah, it's a pretty thin foam. I would honestly be surprised if it's doing anything serious, but it is. It comes with this book or sheet here about all the awards it's won, so apparently it must be good. But that's not something we're going to test for this video. I just wanted to point that out for anyone who was curious, who hasn't seen the P101 like I haven't. So obviously we wanted something that was extremely quiet. That's one reason why we chose this instead of going for something custom like a Dell T320, which would have been pretty ideal because the Dell T320 is capable of holding 8 wow, I cannot speak. The Dell T320 is capable of holding 8 3.5-inch drives just like this, but that has the advantage of having hot swap drive bays, which is something this doesn't do, which was kind of a downside. So we both wanted hot swap drive bays, but it's actually pretty hard to find a case that has hot swap drive bays that's in a convenient form factor, one that's available, and two that isn't overpriced. This case I think was maybe $100, and it's pretty decent. Yeah, it doesn't have hot swap, but it's going to have great airflow. It's going to be very silent, and it's going to be very easy to work with. And honestly, I think the only remotely close candidate to something like this was the Dell T320. But I think he really wanted to go more of a custom route and have a totally custom server instead of going with a U server. And we did price one out. I think we got it to about $560 with ECC memory, and it came with 16 gigs of ECC memory, which was pretty cool. It was like $560, and that doesn't include drives, and that was pretty much everything you needed. But we ended up going for this custom route instead, which is probably a good thing because now he can have damn near silent operation, especially with these Noctua fans. And this whole time I'm talking your ear off, and I should be removing these fans and getting the new ones installed. So I don't think I've said it, but we did go with 3 140mm Noctua fans. The front of this case is only capable of supporting 2 140mm fans, and we're obviously going to be putting the third one here at the rear. And that should be more than enough cooling because the CPU is, I think it has a rated TDP of 35 watts. So I'm guessing the entire system at peak load will probably only use like 125 watts of power. And that's just a wild guess. I just chose that number randomly with nothing really backing that up. But it sounds good. So there, I mean, it's a little overkill, but you know, with 140mm, we get the advantage of that they get to be quieter and have really good airflow compared to like 3 120s, which is at the front of this case. So I kind of want to show you guys the back of this too. What's really cool is that it comes pre-cable managed with all of the included cables, and there's a ton. Wow, this is one long fan cable, which is really nice to see. I guess when you have a case like this, you're going to really want long cables. Now, this case does have onboard or built-in fan controller options that we're not going to use. And the reason why is because the onboard fan controller uses Molex power. It's got Molex power for days. Let's see. And also, it's not even PWM. These are all 3-pin connectors and non-PWM, which isn't too big of a deal because you can manually control the fans. But that's not something we're going to need to do because, again, we have Noctua fans. They're going to run quietly. They're going to run efficiently. And honestly, I'd rather have the motherboard just use PWM. So I'm going to tuck this away, out of sight, out of mind for him. And wow, these are the fans from the front. Okay. And then we're going to get all these other fans removed. Honestly, I'm not sure how good the airflow is going to be on this thing because all of the air is going to be intaked here from the sides. And the reason for that is because on the front panel here, we actually have more of that foam insert, which is pretty cool. You know, I don't think that's going to be too big of a hindrance. That looks like it might be plenty of airflow, but the system's not going to be generating a lot of heat. So again, that should be okay. And of course, we have a removable, cleanable filter here, which is going to be pretty important, especially when it's going to be at somebody else's house. All right, it's been a lovely 22 hours, and we have not run into a single error yet with this RAM. So I think we are good to go to put this into the chassis, the Antec chassis, and we're pretty much done from here. I think we have a couple more things to talk about, but we'll do that as we go. So I'm going to get this thing actually turned off because we're done. All right, so don't let me forget. So one thing I want to do is actually give him his screws for the M.2 drives, and if I feel like I will very easily forget to put those in there for him. And also, I guess I should take out the USB drive for Unraid because we don't need to put it in there just yet. All right, I think 2 screws is gonna be good enough. Hopefully we don't ruin this man's life. Or stuff, I should say. Yeah, it looks good. All right, I think it's safe to just go ahead and screw the motherboard down the rest of the way. I don't think we're gonna need to route any more cables. I did as best of a job as I could with these Noctua fans. So what's interesting is a cable that goes here to the 2 front Noctua fans. It doesn't quite reach from behind the motherboard like I wanted to. So I had to go across, but I think it's hidden pretty well. It's not like you're going to be able to see in this case anyway. So I think that's a pretty good job in this case. And no pun intended. All right, now seems like a good opportunity to insert the ever famous LSI 9211-8i card. So this LSI card is capable of holding exactly 8 drives, SAS or SATA. And that's what we're going to be putting in here. It's pretty popular if you browse the internet at all for Unraid builds. I personally like this. It is already pre-flashed, at least according to the eBay listing that I think we bought this from, or wherever we bought this from. It should be pre-flashed to HBA mode or IT mode, and it'll work automatically with Unraid, hopefully. And I am going to install it in this bottom slot here, not for any real reason. I feel like if he ever adds a graphics card in the future, it'll go on this top slot. Both the PCI Express 3.0 at the top and bottom, or the second one, whatever you want to call it, are both by 16 slots, so they are full lanes, 16 lanes. And installing this here really isn't going to have any effect, but you know, whatever. We're just going to put it down there towards the bottom anyway. Just in case he does want to install a graphics card, and we will reserve all the possible bandwidth we can for that in whatever activities he decides to do with this top PCIe lane. All right, from here it's pretty much just a lot of cable management, and then we will do our first boot with it in the case, and we are pretty much done. But that doesn't mean we don't have more to say. All right, I hope I put this faceplate on correctly, because I definitely want the power supply to be fans down, and I think I did because that lined up pretty well. And I can't find the hole. Oh, I need an extra set of hands so I can make sure I screw this hole right. Moment of truth time. I think I have everything plugged in and it powered on immediately, which is supposed to happen. It should power on immediately because I figured if this thing is going to be remote, he would appreciate that the server would power on in the event there is a power outage, and that way he could get to it. So again, you know, this thing is supposed to be a remote Unraid server with VPN and backup capabilities. So I'm going to leave a link in the video description of exactly how I'm going to implement that, and that's not something I'm actually going to show you in this video, because this video would end up being like 40 minutes long, and everyone seems to have an attention span of about 4 minutes or less. So we're not going to do it. If you're curious, link in the description, and yeah, I think that'll pretty much help you all the way through to do what I'm going to do for this guy or for my client. All right, so it's booting up right now into Unraid, I think, and it did. So we are going to go into GUI mode because I don't have this thing connected to the network yet, and yeah, I don't know. It just feels like the right thing to do because I got to get everything set up anyway, and being in GUI mode will be beneficial because I'll have access to the Unraid UI, web UI, and I'll be able to configure things as I see fit. And then we'll get the side panel up, and that is pretty much done. That is it for this video. If you guys have any questions about this particular build or want to know more information about why we chose certain parts, you know what to do. Drop a comment below and let me know. And with all that being said and done, this thing is really quiet. I don't think you guys can hear it. This fan's pretty loud, but... or maybe those are the discs. I don't know what that is. Anyway, it's really quiet. So I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.